What's up, everybody? It's Nick Forker, and today we're going to look at some pens. I don't know about you, but one of the most ubiquitous comments I get as a visual artist is, "What pen is that?" So much so that in this issue, I decided to make a little cartoon about it in the back. I listed everything and drew everything that I used to make this comic book. So I thought for today's episode, we'd get into talking about some of these implements and, you know, what they're all about. I mean, after all, what pen is that? Here's the drawing I did. So you can see I've made some illustrations here to size, and then both Mike and my partner were like, you should make that into a print. So voila, a what pen is that print. Okay, anyway, that gave me the idea for the episode today, and I thought we would get into some of the pens that we use as visual artists. First of all, I want to talk about a pen that is universally loved, it seems, and that is the Refillable by Crowquill. Now, here's the thing. Reproductions have one of the best line qualities of any pen, in my opinion. The mark that they make is energetic, it's ecstatic, but anything under a 0.5 width, anything under this 0.5 width just seems like a lie. Like this 0.18, 0.30, 0.13, these pens, I'll never use these pens. And the reason why is because Reproductions are known for being so finicky and they clog so easily, and they're such a pain in the ass to clean. People will tell you that they like to clean them. I mean, good. Please buy these Reproductions off me. I'll sell them to you, okay? Great. So, yeah, 0.25, like, actually the older I get, the less I even have any wherewithal for pens this small. Not interested in using them, but I will show you if I can get one of these to work. I'll show you what these lines look like. I just wanted to get that out of the way, you know? I don't like starting off my video with negativity, but maybe this red one, well, it's a 0.60. It's been in the bin for years at this point. Let's see if I can get that to work. It's highly doubtful, but we'll try it. See, look, there's ink stain in the cartridge. So now these things are really beautiful. They make an amazing line. And that's because the tip, it's a beautiful and single little cylindrical piece of metal here. And there's no like fiber at all. So it lays down the ink in a really beautiful and natural way. And the line is unmatched. It really is just wonderful. And you know, this is the type of anxious and energetic line you would attribute to somebody like a Crumb. I think Mikey likes to use these as well. I have another one around here somewhere that isn't fresh and that I haven't messed with. But if you're really into this technical pen, like there are 400,000 different types of technical pens, disposables. I tend to use whatever is cheapest, and at the moment that is the Uni Pin is the cheapest, the Uni Pin. So we'll get into technical pens in a minute. But yeah, I just want to talk about some of the pens I have in my stash. Now, when we look at pens, at least when I talk about pens, my favorite pens are usually Japanese. I mean, without a question, all my favorite pens are Japanese. And in fact, these pens here, these Kuretake Fude brush pens are no longer in production. These are now artifacts. And I have about a dozen of them. Because when I bought them in bulk. I mean, a dozen of these pens? Let's see. Ooh, this is like gold. This is enough to get a book done. So when we're talking about pen, we want to talk about a couple different things. One, we want to talk about the mark they make, most importantly. Two, we want to talk about the ink that they employ. How black is that black? Three, we want to talk about tip degradation. How long do they last? And finally, four, you can talk about how they stand up to erasing, or just kind of a pros and cons. What do we like? What do we dislike? I kind of use a myriad of pens. The thing about pens that you have to understand is they don't actually go in pen cups. You should never put your pens vertically because like wine should always be in contact with the cork. The ink horizontally should always be in contact with the tip. This keeps them from drying out. Also, if you are gonna store your pens for long term, these are just Papermate Flair pens, but they have their place. If you are gonna store your pens long term, I store mine in plastic bags, and that's how I think everyone should do it. Although I understand if you don't want to be a total neurotic like me and double bag all your pens. But I mean, hey, this is why I have these still and they still work. Fresh as the day they were born. What are some other pens we want to talk about? Sharpies, obviously. We're going to talk about brush pens. We're going to talk about Fude brush pens. We'll talk about refillable brush pens. And then we'll talk about some marker pens like the Uni Posca and maybe even some Copic pens as well. We'll just try to run the gamut today. All right, so let's go. All right, first off, let's see here. I think we should talk about the Permapaque. Now, a lot of times we'll talk about markers, you know, and the first kind of marker pens that always pop to mind are Sharpies. I think Sharpies are like a tool. I think they have a very definite use, and that is for marking on things that are plastic, or marking on things with like a vinyl cover, or marking on something like glossy paper. But I actually don't really like Sharpies all that much. I don't like that they are alcohol based, so they smell. I don't like that the ink, when the light hits it, takes like a petrol kind of like blue-black shimmer and sheen to it. I don't like that at all. They bleed quite a bit, and the tip kind of runs into mush. Everyone's opened up a Sharpie and had the stumpy tip, right? Not really interesting at all. Sharpies, again, they're a tool. When you need a hammer, you need a hammer, right? But they're not something I enjoy for art making. In fact, I think my go-to marker, all-around marker, is the Permapaque. And this, again, is a Japanese pen. It's made by Sakura. The Permapaques are really nice because they have a bullet point tip, perfect for writing. And then the other side, you know, you get your chisel tip advantage, which is good for lettering and filling in blacks and big sign areas. Okay, so when we're talking about pens, you know, your pens are only good as your substrate. I use this for making really nice. And it is a paint pen, actually. So you get a nice opacity and darkness from it, although on the watercolor paper, it will fade quite a bit. Not the blackest pen, definitely not. But still a nice line and a nice thin and a nice thick. So the Permapaque I use for mostly just on the desk. And then we have our Sharpie. So this is the Permapaque. All around faves. And here we have the Sharpie. Nice black on the watercolor. Again, alcohol based. So a blacker black for sure. This one even is not very new. Okay, yeah, not too bad. God, it stinks. We all know what Sharpies are though, so I don't have to talk about that anymore. Let's see, what else do we have here? We have a Uni Pin 3 here, so we're gonna get into that. Let's do that. Going right from the marker to the tech pen. I mean, so seeing what we can do with this already. I think with a tech pen, you wanna just use the one that's juiciest. The tips always degrade pretty quickly. They'll either, if you're heavy-handed, they'll go into the metal ferrule, or they'll just, because they're fiber-based, they'll just start to fray and bust apart. But again, a technical pen is a tool, and sometimes you just need a line that does not change line width, that is consistently black and thin, right? So tech pens are for your thin lines. one would say your thinnest lines. I think the pen that is most, like I said, this is the Uni Pin 0.03. I really don't mess with anything smaller than a 0.03. I most of the time am, or this is just an 03, it's called, right? I can never remember where the decimal point. Yeah, this is an 03. Most of the time I'm using an 05. I will never use a 005. That is a nightmare. I can't even see those anymore. But so like the pen that's most often associated with being a technical pen, kind of the most ubiquitous, is the Micron. This is by Sakura as well, the same maker that makes the Permapaque. The Micron is kind of your go-to. But you know what? I think they're pretty interchangeable, and I don't like love the Micron. So as far as tech pens are concerned, just use what you have. I don't even like tech pens, to be honest with you. I find them to be kind of tedious, personally. Yeah, you know, I'm a critic of pens. So I might sound, I think, you know, I might sound a little harsh, but it's just because I've used these things for 40 years and I have a lot of history and experience with them. So some of these pens, I got beef with it. I got beef with these pens, some of them, and they don't even know it. So can you even tell the difference between the Micron and the Uni? No. I mean, if we're being honest, nothing beats a new pen. And these, both the ones that I've used here have been used before. And I don't know if you can tell, but I can always tell a fresh pen from one that has been used. And case in point, we'll move into the next one. This is the Kuretake Fude Gokochi. You can see it right here. Now, of all the pens that I have in my collection, the Kuretake Fude Gokochi is probably my favorite one. But you can see that this is a Fude brush pen, so you can get nice thick lines. And this thing does like to streak if you move too quickly. And you can get thin lines. And maybe even if you hold it 90 degrees, you can get even thinner lines. I mean, that is really versatile, right? It definitely is probably my all-around favorite pen. If I had to just put one pen in my bag, it would probably be this one. Because I can get thick areas of black. The one thing it doesn't do is fill very well. Like fill large areas. Because it always kind of the tip runs out. The thing about the Fude Gokochi is like here on this watercolor paper, it goes down, the watercolor paper is really thick and porous, so it kind of drinks up the ink. But on regular notebook paper, it actually puts down quite a bit of ink. And this one I've been using this week actually pretty heavily. And when I open a new one, we can see the difference. Oh yeah, good. Even the tip, see, you can see the thick to thin and that kind of like ribboning that the thick to thin does, where it goes thin, thick, thin. That's all because of that fresh, look at that, like darts, right? Goes thin, thick, thin. The darting, that's all just because of how responsive and springy the tip is. Now most pens, and this one included, the Fude Gokochi, will have a fibrous tip. In this case, I think it's made from like a felt, or it could be an acrylic made to seam like that. But the fiber tip is really nice and responsive, and you can get really thin lines, especially from the fresh new one. Look at that, wow. You can get really thin ones, you can get really thick ones, and really nice medium lines. So anyway, again, this is my favorite pen, Gold Star, Fude Gokochi, but we'll show you other stuff too. I got way more pens. Let's see here, we talked about the Uni Pin. Okay, so we'll talk about brush pens for a second. This is a Pentel brush pen. I can't remember what size this is, but these are refillable and you just kind of squeeze them. Do be warned though, that these pens tend to like to leak a lot, but they're really great for filling in big black areas. And this one needs a new refill actually, because I can squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and nothing comes out. So I will get a little bit of dry brush with this, which is nice. It's really nice to have pens at different amounts of saturation in the brush. This is another Pentel pocket, a Pentel refillable pen, but this brush has a thinner and longer brush tip. So the lines are really special because this is the most, I think, like what it's like to paint with an actual brush in this shape of a pen. So again, if I'm working with a brush and I want that brush to be refillable and I want it to go into my pen case and I don't want to make a mess, this is the one I'm going to go for. But this is the fine point brush, and you really get some amazing effects from it. And I think this one's due for a refill too. But I love these. These are my favorite for kind of on the go inking. Let's see if I can find another one actually. I have a couple more right here. I don't trust just one brush. If I have a pen that I like, I'll keep 2 or 3 of them around, because what happens is the tip starts to go, and if I'm in the middle of working, I'm not gonna stop to set up a new brush. See, look at that, that's beautiful. You can really do something with this. Nice, long, beautiful strokes. This is the brush that I would use if I was inking a comic, for sure. And see, that's what I'm talking about. When you squeeze it, sometimes it bubbles and drips out onto your paper. So when you are refilling this by giving it a little pump, see how the bubbles popped out? You wanna just make sure you do it away from your drawing, because it will spill and leak ink all over. Okay, really cool stuff, really beautiful here from this Pentel with the gray. It has an FR on the end right there. So this gray joint, this is the one. I'll come across a refill for it in a little bit and I'll put that under the mat, but basically they look like this and you just screw that in. Pretty cool. All right, moving right along. One of my favorite pens of all time is right here, is another Crowquill with this gold. This is just like a pretty standard felt pen. It's a nice mid-range pen and it's a wonderful pen. All right, let's open this up. Can't just hold on to stuff forever. All right, first off, the ink in this is great. All the Crowquill pens have great ink. Look at that tip. You can always tell when it's new because it's just so sharp and pointy. You can get amazing thin lines. The feel of the pen on this is the most important part, because you can get really good sketchy lines. You can get nice, thick, dark lines. You can get everything in between, and it goes thick to thin really well. I know a lot of artists that love this pen, or loved this pen, I should say, now that it's discontinued. So it doesn't exist anymore. Why am I showing you? Fair enough. Probably just because it's one of my favorites. In fact, funny story about this pen. I was one time signing up for an artist membership at a museum, and they were like, oh, we don't give artist memberships. And I was like, okay. And so I was like, yeah, all right, fine, no big deal. Or they did, and I couldn't prove that I was an artist or whatever. And so he had me like sign my credit card receipt, and I pulled out this pen I happened to have. This is what I had in my pocket. So I pulled this out to sign it, and he saw the gold foil and it has like sparkly glitter on the thing to look like stars. And he was so impressed by the pen that I was carrying that he was like, oh, you must be an artist, and gave me the artist membership. And I have all just thanks to this pen. Really funny. Anyway, I'll never forget that. Love this pen. I'm so sad that it doesn't exist anymore. I suppose I could just put it right back in here. The PK2-105, is that what it's called? Again, I don't read Japanese, so it's hard for me to tell, but, oh, I remember. This is called a Hike sign pen. So, Hike with the exclamation point. All right. I don't speak Japanese, but a lot of my friends do, and they're kind enough to help me with my pronunciation every once in a while. All right, so again, another Kawasaki Fude brush pen. If you can tell, this is very much like the Hike pen that we just looked at. It has a little bit looser of a tip though, so you can get kind of a nice scrumbly line I mean, look at how it goes from thick to thin. It's so nice. Not the blackest black though. Okay, next up, let's see here. Here we have a Tombow. Yeah, so the Tombow pens also have a lot of Fude brush pens like this. That's what they're most famous for, actually. This is a Tombow technical pen. Again, thin line pens have a place. They're not my favorite drawing tool, but you need them for outlines and for little dots and dashes. So again, in any drawing kit, you're always gonna want a small, a medium, and a thick line. And I tell people, all you really need is like this pen, the Kuretake, some sort of thin line pen, whether it's a tech pen, or what we're gonna get into in a little bit, which is nib pens. And then, so you just need like a mid-range pen, like a nice middle of the road, a nib pen, and a brush pen. And that'll get you there. You just need 3 things, that's it. And maybe a pencil, you know? I am the type of person where I think I always need something. That's something I've actually trained myself out of. But this idea that you need to go get something before you can start working, I don't know if anybody else deals with that. But I also love pens, so I've tried out all the different pens. And as you can see, they're not too dissimilar. When I'm teaching and it's a bunch of kids, I just give them all Papermate Flare pens. The only this would be a perfect pen if the ink were waterproof. If the ink were waterproof, I would just draw everything with a Flare pen. I would never use another pen. I would just have infinite Flare pens. You get a nice markery feel, so you have a nice touch control. You get a nice thick pen. It does thin out a little the ink, and it's not waterproof. But it's such a fun pen and has such life to it. I really like the feel of it. I usually use it for writing, so, and for kids. Look at those lines, so good. Again, the reason why I give it to kids is because they have that death grip on the pen, so anything, they're like it's carved, like it's a carving tool, you know? I would say that the pen that I like least is probably the Copic multiliner. Here's a bunch of reasons why I don't like the Copics. One, the ink is great and very black, but the pen itself is heavy. And I don't know about you, but if I'm drawing for hours, I don't want this like heavy metal pen in my hand. It'll just tire out my hand way faster. The other thing that I don't appreciate about this is because they're refillable, when you put the cap on the back, a lot of times you pull out the guts, right? When you go to take the cap off, it's not the biggest deal, but it's such, I mean, it's such a pain in the butt. And you especially don't want to use these with kids because it'll take them apart on you. But they do have a nice line. They are refillable, which is helpful. But yeah, a little too heavy for me. And not always worth the hype, the Copics. All right, let's see what else do we have in the bag. Okay, there, see? It's like a trombone. All right, get in there. Okay. Next up, Uni Poscas. So this is the best white pen that I know of. When you first get into comics, everyone will say use the Uniball Signos, but I actually don't like these Uniball Signos very much, as you can tell by I bought a bunch and never used them, because they're quite finicky. And you have to draw, they only work on top of solid areas of black, or they work best on top of solid areas of black. And of course, they work really well now because this one's brand new. But as soon as you use it for a little while and you pull it back out, it works less and less well each time. The Uniball Poscas, however, I'm saying Uniball, but it's just Uni now. Okay, the Uni Poscas work really well. But again, these have their drawbacks. It's like you have to shake it up. You have to make sure the ink is not like milky. And sometimes they will just like barf ink all over everything. But when they do work well, you get a nice white line. And these tips do degrade pretty quickly, actually. There's some kind of fiber. They're like an acrylic fiber. And they do bust apart pretty quick, as evidenced by this thing. Look at how, so a nice thick line because it's been used a bunch, but it sputters. Because of the acrylic fibers, they like sputter. and they spray. And that, if that's the effect you want, great. Now remember, I don't really care about, like, this is not like an objective goodness scale. This is just about what the pen does and using the right pen for the job. I like how black the mark is here. But again, it's a paint pen, so it will smudge. And it's just all about what you need. What do you need for the job? Right? Like, there's no hierarchy of pens, but you want to use a pen that is going to be the least frustrating and accomplishes what you set out to do in the best possible way. So let's talk about nib pens for a second. So the nib is probably your best all-around tool for lining and getting calligraphic lines. Calligraphic lines are ones that go from thick to thin. The nib's really nice because it does a lot of different things, and it does it pretty well. One of the things that the nib has going for it is that because you choose your ink, you can get the blackest ink in the world, and the tips don't degrade nearly as quickly because they're metal. You can get nice feathering. This is a G nib. You can get nice thin lines. You get nice thick lines. The thing with the G nib though, it will let the ink slide down pretty easily. It is nice and stiff though. So some good responsiveness from it. The only thing I would say is that if you're making too many lines close together, oftentimes it will pool and puddle. So just be careful how much ink you have on your nib at any given time. See, like that right there. When you put the lines together, the liquidity of the pen will kind of carry a few lines together and make little puddles like this. But really nice blacks, and you're only limited by your technique, I guess. Really nice thick lines. Just make sure you have a pen that can, paper rather, that can stand up to the liquid ink. Cool stuff. Also, when you're using a nib, it's always good to have some paper towels handy and a little thing of water. You want to make sure that you put, you have a little jar or something you can put water into, a little paper towel for cleanup. And you don't need as much water as you think. You just need like ½ an inch of water. Just let that nib rest in there, just so it's not touching the ferrule. All right, let's talk about nibs. We're into nibs now. We're doing nib stuff. All right, another nib that I have here is this bullet point nib. This thing's pretty cool. My partner got me this. All right, let's talk about this. This is way harder to clean, but you can do really cool stuff with it, like really thick lines. It's like an ink crayon. You can do really thin lines. It holds a lot of ink actually. So this is cool because this thing is a soldier. Like, you can draw really calligraphic lines, thick hatching. It can be a little unpredictable, this bullet point nib, but it's gonna go through most anything. And if you hold it up like a regular pen, 90 degrees, or close to it, 70, 80 degrees, you'll still get a really nice line from it. Like I said, it holds a lot of ink, so you got a lot of line in this pen. Really difficult to clean, however, as the nib points are recessed, so kind of weird. Next up, wow, look at this. It's a nib holder from Halftone Hospital. Thank you, Victoria, for this beautiful nib. If you don't know about Halftone Hospital, get over there right now. Don't give your money to True Grit Texture to Supply or some other hack. Give it to someone who makes comics and is part of the comics community, none other than our own Victoria Douglas. All right, Victoria sent me this wonderful nib holder, and in it was already a Hunt 102. So a Hunt 102 is a nice, skinny, tiny little baby nib that makes really cool lines and is kind of the choice of artists for a long time. The Hunt 102,
one of the original Crowquill nibs used by the greats, you know, your Todd McFarlanes, your Rob Liefelds, your Scott Campbells, if you will. No, I'm only saying those because it was popularized, you know, by all the gents from Image Comics. But even before that, you know, your Art Adams, your Walt Simonson, and all the greats, your R. Crumbs. Yeah, so the Hunt 102 makes fine lines. It makes really nice lines, actually. The tip is on the firmer side for these delicate nibs. So you get a nice responsive bounce back from the pen. I mean, all you really need for nibs, like I've tried out a lot of them. You might like the Gillot and like the French nibs, but those are really soft and they almost are like painting with a brush. So when you first start, really the two nibs that I recommend that you start with are the Hunt 102 and the G nib, which I did previously. But yeah, Hunt 102, you can't go wrong with this. Really great nib. So we have 3 nibs here that you saw on the nib section of the pen, and they've been sitting in the water. So now they have a nice gray. Yeah, that's right. You can use your gray leftover water as ink wash, adding a second tone. So nice little cleanup here, pretty easy when you use the water method, because like I said, they just sit in the water and they don't really, the ink doesn't coagulate and get dry and crusty, so you can clean it up pretty quick. This one is a little bit harder to do because, like I was saying, it has like these ridges, this bullet point, so you got to get in there with a little tool and clean out each individual gutter like that. Not ideal, but each pen, each tool has its own kind of like drawbacks. You find out pretty quickly. All right, well, what about brush pens? So we talked a little bit about brush pens before, but the pen we didn't talk about is is this baby, the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen. It's kind of your best all-around choice. The tip stands up for a while. They don't degrade super fast. They're really easily refillable because they have these little cartridges that plug in here. And you just pop that in and you screw it shut. The tip will go over time, but it gives you, it's a good practice brush. You know, it's a good beginner brush because it's pretty simple. It never leaks unless you're on an airplane. Oh, any of these pens will just bleed all over the place on an airplane. If you're on an airplane with one of these, don't even open it because the vacuum, once you open it, it'll just push all the ink out on your page. And that goes doubly for these guys. I can't tell you how many sketchbooks are just got soaked with ink when I was on a plane. Leave your pens at home. I don't actually know what the right answer is when it comes to pens on a plane. Cut to Samuel L. Jackson. Here we have another kind of Fude brush pen, the Zebra pen. This thing's sweet. This is like that, it's very similar to this pen, but they still make this one. So if you want this and you can't find it, because of course you can't, I tried really hard, then just get this Zebra joint. I like the Zebra better than the Tombow. Notice I don't even have any Tombows here. No shade if you use Tombows, the ink is not that black for me. They run out quickly, the tip goes bad and they dry out. They're not my thing. I know you can get them at Hobby Lobby or whatever, but this is a much better pen. And for all your pen needs, I would go to jetpens.com. Jet Pens, mom and pop shop. They ship really quick and they give you good deals. They import all kinds of Japanese pens. So any kind of pen that I'm talking about today, you can find at jetpens.com. All right, so what else are we talking about? We have a brush pen that's gray, so you can do a little gray wash. I know. Unbelievable. Look at that. Holy cow. So we didn't talk about which ones are waterproof and which ones are not. Notice how this blends. So this Fude Gokochi, not waterproof. Now, is that the case if you let it dry overnight? I don't remember. which ones are waterproof though. Well, anything you use with a proper ink will be waterproof if you give it enough dry time. I was interested in checking the waterproofness of these tech pens, and they seem to be fairly waterproof. Knowing how water fast your pen is really important. So I would try your pen on a separate pad of paper before you do it on your work. In fact, you should always get in the process of like having a scratch piece of paper next to your art and just like running off your pen a couple lines. One, you get to see how much juice is in the pen, like how inky it is. Two, you get to see if you're working in color, it's very important because you're gonna get a true value of the color. But three, you just get a sense of what kind of line it's gonna make. So before you go onto your pad or onto your artwork with your pen, you just wanna try it out on some scratch paper and see if it's what you want. I have this beautiful thing. This thing is lovely. It makes such a different type of brush. I forget which kind this is. This is another Japanese one that I tried out. Really nice for organics. I'll see if I can find the title of this if anyone's interested. But it's a really beautiful one and refillable. And I remember I did like some trees with it, and it was putting up the leaves so well. Like it just felt like I was painting with a part of a tree. It really does all the like organic stuff really well. Hair, tree leaves and stuff. It has a delicate tip. I don't know. There's just something a little different about this one. Really nice. This comes in like this long brown. It's long and thin. I think I see an H17 on it. Can you see that? H17. Yeah, so anyone out there who's bilingual can help me with identifying some of these pens. Let's see, what else do we have here? Here's just another Pentel pocket brush pen. I love these pens, they're so nice. You know, they're not the most like professional thing, like get yourself a sable hair brush, but they're nice for carrying around with you. You know, a lot of times you don't have liquid ink is not something you can always carry to places. You don't always have like a place to set up and water jars and stuff. So the Pentel pocket brush pen is a really nice way to do it. I don't think you can get this orange one. I got this in Europe, so I don't think you can get it here. They didn't release this here. The ones here will look exactly the same, only they'll be black like this. I like that pen a lot. It's just like I said, it's a good mixed use pen. You know, here's a pen that isn't really an art pen. It's the Pilot G207. But you could do worse than this. This has a nice, reliable line, and there is something to it that, you know, it's a gel pen. But this thing, occasionally it will glob, like on the ends of lines. It'll make a little ball of ink, and it will smear because it's gel. But if you let it dry, it definitely has its own thing going on, which I found interesting in the past. And to that end, non-art pens that I use for drawing sometimes, especially with the kids, this thing, maybe you remember this from school, the Pilot Precise V5. You know what? This pen too, it's like, this is a fine liner pen. If you don't have a tech pen, this is a fine pen. And you know what? The fact that it's a metal tip is really important here, because what happens with all these fiber pens, like the tech pens, and part of the reason why I get so frustrated with these tech pens is because when you run them through graphite, the graphite builds up on the tip and it dries out the tip and ruins the pen. But this Pilot Precise V5 will run right through graphite. So let's say you don't have access to an art store and you can just get to a Staples or something. If you get this Pilot Precise V5, you can use this as your liner, and you could do way worse than this. This thing is a soldier. It will just crush right through pencil, no problem. And the same goes for the Pilot G2. I have fond memories of this pen. They write forever. That's the other thing. So, you know, I once heard that Art Spiegelman just used like a fountain pen and a stack of typing paper to do mouse. You know what? There's something about having limited resources and just using what you got. There is no shame in the game using these pens to do your comic. I really think they're both wonderful. So they have their own line. You know, each pen has a slightly different line to it. And I think this one, the touch liner, I actually really like these, the Shinhan art pens. These tech pens actually are pretty nice. I feel like they didn't dry out as much as I thought they would. Of course, this one's quite old. But this is what I'm saying, these pens go to shit pretty quick. So like, check your pens. This one's going in the garbage. Goodbye, pen, thank you. All right, what do we have here? We have a Sakura Micro Perm #3, multi-surface. It's a 0.35. Let's open that up and see what's what. Ooh, nice tip, nice and black. Permanent ink too. Look at how black that is. That looks great. See, it's already starting to dry out. I mean, something about it, you know? 0.35 though, that's about as thin as I'll ever go, and I really only use that for accents. I'm never really gonna draw with a 0.35, it's too thin. You know, when I was young, I thought, oh my God, look at these thin lines, I would use a 0.05. Now that I'm getting older, it's like, just give me this dip pen, and let me just draw with that. I can go thicker, I can go thinner. The reason why I don't use the thin pens, if we're being honest, is that what happens is you get all this like, you know, super hyper detail, which is just really OCD kind of behavior in the first place, but you get all this like hyper detail and then you go to print it and it will drop out and you lose all the detail. What you learn is that this like, there's a pen width that is perfect for reproduction. If your purpose is reproduction and not, you know, hyper realism or like that kind of fetishization that comes from making a bazillion marks, which don't get me wrong, I think we all go through that phase. I sure did. I mean, like, I can't even lie. But look at how much blacker that ink, yeah, I guess you can't really see it. Anyway, there's something to be said about making a lot of marks. It's a phase that I went through for sure. And then when I started doing work for reproduction, meaning work that I knew I was gonna print, I needed a line that would print and not fall away. Like if I made this line, this gray, it's kind of mid-tone black, most of the detail would be lost. So if I'm drawing for the purposes of reproduction, black and white especially, then I need to draw in a line that is thick enough that will reproduce, and that's where this thing comes in. I mean, you can get some really strong lines from it. So this is pretty much my go-to now. I think there is a little bit of a learning curve with a nib, but everything about that learning curve ends up being a, you know, a feature and not a bug. You just, there's something alive about it. And you start to appreciate the nib line. There's certain things it can't do, like I'm always pulling the line towards me, because if you try to push with a nib pen, it snags into the paper and sputters. And it's the same reason you can't do you really can't do circles so well. Anyway, nib pen's where it's at. But it's an acquired taste. I know there's a lot of people out there that like to work digital. So maybe if you work digital, that's totally fine too. You maybe just skip this episode. This is all about the analog, baby. All right, so let's see here. Have we come to any conclusions? Have we learned anything at all? This is Nick Forker for Comics People. I'll see you out on the tables.